Welcome to the Position Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Capasso, and we're here to learn together. I'm on a personal research project to understand how elite performers in the sports, military, and the creative arts make successful transitions into their personal and professional lives beyond those early pursuits and endeavors. And I have a theory that the environment that someone chose or that chose them, and the position or role that someone played in that environment that they chose or that chose them, can provide the keys to understanding their best path forward. We're just getting started, and I'm excited to share these dynamic stories with you. Let's dive in. Kurt, welcome back to Austin.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. How often do you get back to Austin these days?
I'm here a lot. I'm probably here every other week. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm down here quite a bit.
Okay. Well, now I'm offended because I don't hear from you every week. So,
But I come, I'm in, and then I'm out, and then I'm out.
I know,
Yeah,
I know. Your world is extremely busy. But I have had the good fortune of working with you at several companies at this point, both as an executive team and myself individually as a growing, emerging kind of executive, let's say, in these startup tech companies. And I've always been blown away by the work that you're doing. But how do you actually describe what you do?
I love this question. I've been doing this what I'm doing now for 29 years, and I don't know that I've ever come up with the perfect answer. Essentially, what I do is born out of a passion that I had as an executive. We were in a company that we grew quite large really quickly. I had a board of directors that was kind of the who's who, had access. I could pick up the phone. At that time, it wasn't a cell phone, but I could pick up the phone and call anybody. But I needed somebody that would come alongside me, that cared more about what they could put into me than what they could get out of me, and had kind of been there and done that. But all those people were off either growing other companies or sitting on boards or whatever, and I could never really find that person. And so after we sold that company, the CEO I was working with said, "Hey, you've got a unique ability to look into the heart of a company and kind of poke around and see what needs to happen for them to accelerate. You should go and help other leaders, whether you sit on boards or whatever you do." And at the time I was a little bit offended. I remember I thought, he's saying I should go be a consultant, which at the time I didn't have I came out of Arthur Andersen, which was a great experience. And this is a long answer to your quick question.
Yeah.
But I think it helps understand what it is that I do. Is I had some friends say, "Would you come sit on our board?" And I said, rather than doing that, let me come in and poke around and see, because coaching wasn't really a thing at that point. It just wasn't. And so I said, if I can identify some things, maybe kind of listen to the business, because if you listen carefully, the business will talk to you. It is a legal person, has its own tax ID, but it doesn't have its own voice, but it will talk if you can listen. So anyways, so I started working with some friends 29 years ago in that capacity, and I got a helper's high from coming alongside them. Now, as time evolved, it became called coaching. And so, so that's what I do, is I come alongside, otherwise highly successful leaders and their teams and coach them. And oftentimes I invest in them as well, both money and time.
Yeah.
So
No,
long answer.
No, that's amazing. I've always thought growing up, especially the sports backgrounds that we have, that there's no word that I hold in higher regard or no person than coach. I think that's the ultimate sort of, denomination of somebody is coach. But so tell me, because you said you got into it with the inspiration that you wanted someone who could put more into you than they were going to get out of you. You said you got this helper's high of going alongside of people. So that's what you do as a coach. How do you do that?
So, in a very literal sense, what I do is I do what I just said. I've got a process that has served me and the people that I've been fortunate enough to work with very well. And I listen to the business. And how I do that is I have confidential conversations with several people in the business. And they're confidential in the sense that I don't go back and say, "Hey, this person said this," or "This person feels this way." A lot of times people say, "I don't care. I'd still say it myself." I still don't, for two reasons. One, things out of context usually are problematic. But more importantly, I'm looking for trends and patterns of what is or what is not working against what they say their promises and goals are. Every CEO and their team makes promises to themselves, to their customers, their family, the people they're working alongside, and then they set goals to do those things. And so getting clear on what are those promises and goals, and through those confidential conversations, looking at collateral material kind of in a holistic way, I let the business talk to me. And then I meet with the CEO for a day or two and let them kind of see the people, the process, let them hear the company through my eyes and through my voice. The goal of which is we identified typically 3 or 4 higher level issues or opportunities that if we don't address, those promises and goals would probably need to change, or realistically, we're not going to meet them. So through that journey and through that process, you're building conditions of trust. You're proven to be somebody that truly does care more about what you can put in than what you can take out. So it's the unspoken moments. It's the journey that builds the conditions that allow for a good coaching relationship.
Yeah. 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 That relationship can be so powerful. But it's dawned on me over time, both as I've played that role somewhat here or there, or as I've used coaches, it's not always obvious on how to sort of make the most of it, or how to make sure that you're both a good participant and follower and leader in that conversation. So what advice do you have, or what have you learned about how to make the most of that relationship with your clients?
Yeah, that's really a thoughtful question. And I get asked that question a lot, is because coaching is an unregulated industry. You could be a failed executive today and be a coach tomorrow. I mean, that's just the facts of things. And that happens a lot because I think a lot of people get enamored with the concept of coaching. But it truly is a servant role if you're doing it well and you're doing it right. And you think about the coaches we've had in sports, the ones, not all of them are great, but the ones that are the ones that saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself, that built those conditions of trust, that pushed you harder than you were willing to push yourself. At times you wondered if they even liked you. But looking back, you reflected and say, wow, they were really for me. So I think the conditions that make someone, we hear these words, is a person coachable? What does that really mean? What that means is a person committed? Do they have conviction? Or is it that they just want to kind of de-risk messing things up? And a person that wants to be coached doesn't just want to be pushed and kicked and, have their face mask shaken, which is sometimes the pictures that we conjure up when it comes to sports coaching. But in business coaching, it really does, is it someone that's willing to come in the journey with me? Is it somebody that's willing to understand the whole me and not just the business me? Is it somebody that's willing to understand what my strengths and limitations are and can build, once again, the conditions that allow for us, that can handle the weight of the truth and knows how to do that and builds that as part of their process. So as being coachable, I've got to be able to be committed and to the relationship. Oftentimes I'll hear people say, I'm not the kind of person that reaches out or whatever. Well, you need to be the kind of person that reaches out. You need to have enough self-awareness that you alone can do it, but you can't do it alone. So your coach is a key component in your success, and how do you utilize them? And you've got to have a plan on how to.
So when people aren't making the most of it, or maybe missing an opportunity, what are they not doing that they could be doing more? Like, what have you learned?
So what they're not doing is and executives are busy, and especially in this day and age. I mean, it's always, I read all these articles. There's so much content pushed out there about, you just need to, this management, this leadership layer just needs more time to think and do this. And so we've got to create efficiencies. Every time there's efficiencies, it's filled with more stuff to do. But what you've got to do is be disciplined. The executives that really are effective, highly effective, are the ones that do, that capture, that understand and capture time. They have their calendar work for them. They do not work for their calendar. And so one of the things to your question is they create time and intentionality about how to think and reflect and what are the resources I have. Very successful CEOs spend money on lots of things, groups like YPO or other groups like that, peer groups, conferences, TED Talks, coaches. They have a host of people that are there to help support them and guide them in a journey that is quite lonely. And it's lonely not because you're so special. It's lonely because you get judged in a vacuum and you get judged out of context and you still have a job to do. And so the ones that don't do it, simply, they just don't make time and they get too busy until there's a crisis. And then they want to turn to that network and have them solve the crisis. They wait till the problems show up in the results versus predicting the problems before they show up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I've seen you help teams do that, sort of go through trying to predict what's around the corner, try to see some of those patterns. So like we talked a little bit about maybe what can hold an individual back or a CEO back that you're working with directly, but also as you've worked with the broader teams, what's a dynamic there that can get in the way between that team that you've seen most bubble up that you kind of work through? And are there anything that these teams are collectively doing better than others to avoid those things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's this simple and this difficult. The teams that are working at a highly effective, because I facilitate all kinds of conversations. I mean, thousands of conversations. What is a highly effective team? What's a high performing team? Come up with all these adjectives, come up with these tools and ways to measure it, come up with these ways to communicate it. It's building conditions of trust. I've literally seen wildly successful companies that have gone public that have a back channel that is so unhealthy and so divisive that when we're in the room, we're being the executive team, everybody's playing nice and saying the things, but they leave the room and they have a different conversation. That's what I've seen. The teams that are highly effective don't do that. They figure out how to build those conditions of trust, true trust. And it's, like I said, it's that simple and it's that difficult.
How do they do that?
They take time. Time is a key element. You're going to hear kind of that thread pulled through here. They take time to get to know each other. They want to know, who are you? You know, what makes you laugh? What brings you joy? What burdens you? What makes you cry and builds your passion? What are the things that you dream about? So who are you? And they want to know where you're at. Truly care about where are you at in your journey and the goals that you're meeting and those things. They genuinely care about, how can I help you take that next step? Not just in the business realm, but in life. And so they build real relationships. And like I said, in this time and especially in market conditions like we're in, time is something that we don't have an abundance of. And so people just get into, especially when we're in the Zoom world, and people are doing more than they do. I was just meeting with a CEO recently where his team is, and this is a really good guy. This is a nice, genuine, cares about people. His team is suffering in silence. And it's not because that's the way he leads or wants to lead. It's because he doesn't have time. So when he sees a problem, he gets very surgical and gets right to that. He doesn't do any coaching. He doesn't really understand. He just is like, why is it like this? Why isn't what you said you were going to? And people are just left in pieces. And so, this element of time to build the relationships is what builds trust. It's, once again, it's something that is overly obvious and embarrassingly simple, but we just don't do a lot of.
Overly obvious and embarrassingly simple. I have a feeling that you're just chock full of those examples that where individuals and companies fall down. And I can't tell you, on a personal level, it really hits home because the number of teams I've been on or been leading where you just don't prioritize making the time together as a group, or it's a little bit flying by the seat of the pants, or maybe the agenda's coming together in real time and or even on a quarterly basis, let's say, just having the year booked out, like just having the placeholders in the calendar can mean everything in terms of creating some of that intentionality, right? Versus, okay, we should have our quarterly offsite in July. When should we do it? And it's June 16th,
That's very common. Yeah. And the part of the rhythms that when I'm working with an organization, helping build that operating rhythm is thinking about creating those moments and those times ahead of time. Like you said, it's, it's in 2 weeks. All right, let's sit down. What's our agenda going to be? But it's like, we're having these conversations each week, each day, each month. What do we need to be collecting? What are the trends and patterns? Once again, let the business talk to you. Listen to it carefully. OKRs. People treat OKRs like they are a tool to track or to hold people accountable. And sure, it does some of those things, but what it is it's a communication piece. If you'll listen, it will tell you what the business is saying. Is it groaning in certain areas? Is it thriving and full of life in certain areas? But you got to listen. And so, for example, like with OKRs is I see where sometimes, the date comes and goes, or something gets deprioritized and no one talks about it, or we turn what our action items into now major objectives, and everybody comes overloaded. Well, if you listen carefully, what's that business telling you? This is happening throughout the business. It's not that we missed the OKR or the date. It's that we have a culture where people feel that this is okay, or they're not allowed to raise their hand and say there's a problem. But no one ever listens to that part of it. They just get right to the issue at hand. Once again, it's just a matter of just kind of being able to slow down and listen.
Yeah.
Because then you can speed up.
Yeah. yeah, this concept of slowing down to speed up, it's a really difficult thing to do when you're trying to grow as a company and you got all kinds of opportunity coming. It feels a little counterintuitive.
Well, it feels theoretical,
Yeah, yeah,
like, especially when like if a coach or consultant
yeah.
is like, go write a book because that doesn't really work. But it does work, but you've got to be committed. That's why I'm saying this conviction, this commitment,
Yeah,
and how you do it. Obviously, it's kind of a little bit of like a bumper sticker, but
yeah,
how you do it is hard, and that's what I spend most of my time doing is teaching the how. It's not what needs to happen or why. Most people know what need, and they sure know why. It's how do we go about doing this? What are the tips and tricks? A friend of ours, Sam Decker, that I'm going to go see here. He calls it my magic notebook. He goes, "What's or Andrew? I don't know if you know Andrew with Closed Loop.
hmm
He said the same thing. He goes, I'm calling because I know you have something in your magic notebook.
yeah. Well, there's several, I would call them Kirk isms that have stuck with me, but one of them in particular that I've shared several times and always give you credit for, but it's the can't do, won't do, don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it seems to me, and I've heard that in your context in terms of sometimes people are trying to assess, is someone the right person for the job, or is there something we can do to help a person? But in some ways, as an organization, there's some can't do, perhaps, like the skill set isn't there in that team or in that group. There's maybe a won't do, right? Like just won't prioritize the time. And it sounds like you help them with the don't know how, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's the thing. They know what they should be doing, but quite sure on the framework of how to get there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's in athletics, we know it's easy. It's a little easier to assess because if you can't do something like I cannot dunk a basketball, like just not going to happen. But if my job is to dunk a basketball, I may hey, can you send me some training on how to dunk? Could you, and I may try to make it look and, maybe get some video clips to look like but I can't dunk. If I won't, like I can dunk. I'm just tired of it. My wrist hurt from hitting the rim. My knees hurt when I land. I won't do it anymore, but my job requires I do it. It's the don't know how is where, you get that opportunity to teach and train. And in athletics, it's easier to tell those differences. In business, it's a little bit harder. You've got to make those judgment calls. And being able to see, whether, if somebody's not performing, it's one of those three reasons. So,
Yeah. Do you have an example of like maybe a process you went through? I think about it in the context of breakthroughs. Like this is the way I'm sort of thought about the world a lot recently is oftentimes, you're growing, you get stuck for some reason. I think it's you that you've said, nothing kills more than success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you've grown your way into problems. And any examples where you've helped some companies through that really resonate for you, like you're really proud of, or seen a team really respond and do the right things to break through?
I've been really fortunate in my career to be kind of at kind of the elbow of companies that have had major breakthroughs and major breakdowns. And you learn from those things. I've got lots of examples where nothing was killing faster than success. But some recent ones, and I'll spare you the name of the companies or the people, but whenever this is how whenever I'm investing in a company, and this is oftentimes how a lot of investors look at things. I don't know if they use these exact words, but this is kind of a framework that they look at and use. There's three things that got to happen. You got to have a great thesis, and that's more than just product market fit, but you've got to have a thesis of what's our right to win. Do we really have a right to win, and do we really have an angle in which we're going to go be able to win big, especially if we're taking other people's money, venture capital, private equity, angel investors, whatever. If you don't have a good thesis, what ends up, those companies get packaged up and get sold, and hopefully they make it through the pref step. The other one is execution. So can we bring the thesis to life through a rigor and a discipline, through a communication cadence that allows the strategy to come to life? And when companies don't execute well, someone's losing their job, and until somebody has a C in their title. And then the third part is the market conditions. So when the cost of capital is low, easy access to capital, we're able to attract that money, then that allows us to grow. But when the cost of capital is high and its access to it's difficult, or we're not performing, then those companies that otherwise have a good thesis and have proven their ability to execute, they just have to cut burn until the market comes back and they can survive. That sounds fairly simple, but when it's actually playing, I am answering your question. You probably wonder if I'm answering your question is, oftentimes I see in this market, we're seeing a lot of companies struggle, but what happens is oftentimes boards, aren't as intimately as involved as they think they are. They care a great deal. They provide a ton of value in many, many ways, but in that day-to-day grind, they're not in that. And so sometimes they automatically go to thinking it's the execution.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not the execution, if we have the wrong thesis, then what ends up happening is you can spend a lot of time firing people, trying to get it right, trying to put in systems, trying to start to have conversations. We need to hold people accountable. We need to be more urgent, all of the stuff that get kind of wrapped when that happens. Meanwhile, if you don't have a good thesis. So I have a company that I worked with that had a really massive and quick growth, went from, an enterprise value of roughly $30 million to, in a couple of years, to over $600 million. The market they're in, when the cost of capital went down, all of a sudden the answer was no. Like, you went to something that in that industry, the answer was no. They could execute, like they were like precision ability to execute. They had a good thesis or they wouldn't have grown like they did, but the market contracted on them. But the board really started focusing on on execution. They cut 75% of that business. And it really gutted the culture, it gutted everything else like that. Now, they did need to cut because they needed to wait for the market conditions to come back. But through conversations with the board, with the CEO, with the team and stuff like that, we were able to normalize that journey and say, listen, like, we have not done anything wrong from an execution. Our thesis is solid. Let's go back. Here's the market. This is outside of our control. I have another situation where the company grew real quick, had tons of money. They had over $40 million sitting in their accounts. They could execute really well. Communication cycles, accountability, drilling down. Okay, I mean, it was brilliant. But all of a sudden it dried up. The thesis went bad, and the CEO had to have the guts and actually had a pretty difficult conversations with the board, because the board usually, what they're really good at is identifying theses, and they're the ones that hold the capital that fund those theses. They rely on you to execute. In this situation, had to navigate where the founders broke up because they disagreed. The CEO thought it was a thesis, the other founder thought it was other things. It was starting to back channel with the board, which obviously goes back to what I was saying, those unhealthy conditions of trust. But through that was able to navigate, pivoted on the thesis. The company's back to growing. The board is back together, but it was a really tumultuous. These are the times when I talk about it's lonely. This is where I want to be and have been privileged to be at the right hand of some of these people in these deeper conversations. This isn't just about coaching tactics and tricks and tips to be a better executive. It's about coaching in these dynamic moments that over 29, 30 years that I've gotten to be part of and privileged to be part of. Those are some of the things that I'm probably, I don't know if proud's the right word, but very lucky to have learned from, that I couldn't have gotten in MBA or anything like that.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really powerful is, it's sort of like we talk about, where winning and losing happens, and it's in those moments,
Mm-hmm.
right? And those are in many ways probably very defining moments for companies, which is the conversations that people aren't hearing or seeing, or decisions that are needing to be made that require the courage, like you talked about, where that person who needs to make that decision or a group might need like someone to confide in, right? To bounce something off of, even if they've already got the right answers, to get the confidence to move faster.
Yeah. And I know you're that person to a lot of people. I know that you have played that role. You played that role for me. We all need, like I said, we alone can do it, especially as people that have been in athletics that have transitioned into higher levels of performing. We alone can do it, but we can't do it alone.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of people, we've got a lot of friends in common that hold you in that regard, and you provided that.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of, I did have a CEO I was working with that I was actually talking about coming on board in an operating advisor capacity, not exactly the capacity that you play, a little bit more on the go-to-market side between the CEO and their then VP of sales. And I was introduced to them through a common friend and investor. And I remember talking to the CEO, and he said, well, things are going really well right now, and I just don't really think we need much help. And that was true. Things were going very well. And I just said, well, look, I'd love to help you and I'd love to get close to this. The reality is the rough seas are coming. I mean, that's the thing that we know about the business that we're in, whether you grow your way into those rough seas or don't, they're coming. And so would you rather that I am intimate with the business, have the relationship so that when times get tough, we can operate in that moment? Or you can contact me then, and then it'll take 90 days for me to get up to speed and then we may have lost time. I said, that's one way of us thinking about whether it makes sense to get started now. The other way is really around, kind of what we're talking about is just crossing that relationship and being able to move faster. So what I basically said to this person, because he's a brilliant CEO and a brilliant leader, is you're going to have all the answers. My question is, how quick are you willing to move on those decisions? And sometimes just having the confidence that you've bounced an idea or you've been able to verbalize it, will just get you to be able to move faster. And in the end, we actually did have to make a pretty critical decision in the business. And we talked later and he said, hey, just having you to bounce this off of, I'd probably saved me 6 months of me sitting on that decision because I would have been just, not really dealing with it.
You did a much better job of answering the question you asked me earlier. Like what makes coaching effective? It's having that ability, that knowledge to understand that you are going to grow yourself into problems one way or another. The market's going to hand them to you. The execution's going to hand them to you. Someone's going to hand them to you, and they are coming.
Yeah.
And so how do you go about trusting that when those times come, for him to be able to say that to you, that, hey, you saved me 6 months. A lot of times people, like I said, just become so transactional. It's like, you haven't done anything for me in the last week, so therefore, and it's like that's fine, and that's one kind of coaching. But the people that perform at the highest level, the Olympic level of business athletes, don't think that way. They have a different mindset about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. It makes me think of, there's a book that someone gave me when my first daughter was born called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. And I know you have 3 beautiful daughters who are now, I think all 3 are married.
Yeah.
Right,
Yep.
at this point.
The last one got married this summer.
Yeah, that's right. And I've had the pleasure of seeing them through social media grow up.
Uh-huh.
But part of what's in that book, just to relate it to that, is how being a great father comes down to some small number of defining moments as a dad, right? And I know you've probably lived those. And actually that can be the difference. And your daughter may not love that moment where you showed up to the party at 2:00 in the morning to drag her out, but it was in her best interest, but she will remember it later. And it makes me think of this example as a coach is, you could work with someone for 2 years, for 5 years, for 10 years, but at the end of the day, it probably comes down to some small number of defining moments.
Yeah.
And it may only be a handful, but that may be worth everything, right?
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. I think and like I said, it's true in our relationship with our kids, with our spouses. It's true, and it's true in our business relationships. It just is. And I have a structure because I'm kind of aware of that, where I work my way out of a job and work my way into a friendship. And how I do that is like, I don't want people getting fee fatigue. I don't want to get fee fatigue, And so sometimes I'm like, hey, like we're going to pause the billing. There's nothing that's going on here, or whatever. And oftentimes I'm invested or I've got options that are vesting or whatever the case may be. And it's like, listen, like, yeah, we're in calm seas. Let's enjoy this. But let's not end it because we're in calm seas. Let's keep the conversations going. Let's keep checking with the team, doing those kind of things and stuff. So when those rough waters hit, like you said, you can get in and you kind of know directionally where to go. You still have that objectivity that can guide them and stuff. But that's probably, like I said, you answered your question a lot better than I did, is that's probably one of the significant differences, the mindset on how to use a coach, a mentor, a board, a peer group, whatever.
Yeah. No, it's powerful. Well, I'm curious, maybe bringing this back to some of your experience in sports and elite level athletics. I know you played a lot of sports, and football in particular was a sport that you carried through college. Are there any particular experiences from football or experience there that you find yourself touching back on most professionally now? Maybe it could be a given moment or a set of experiences. Like, what do you find yourself reflecting on most that helps you in what you do now from that experience?
So there's kind of 2 things. One is there's definitely some moments, I'll share those, but there's more of just kind of the journey. So there's the moments in the journey that definitely have taught me some things, but the journey itself has taught me that in transitions I didn't learn this while I was playing sports. This is something that I've taken from sports and pulled forward, and the pattern has been consistent, is we're going to have problems in life. There are going to be hard times, and there's going to be difficulty, and there's going to be pain. And what I found out, and I've studied and watched people my whole life. I was a cornerback in playing college football. Wasn't fast, but you need to be fast. So that's problem number one. But I had to really study and become a student of the game. I had to watch film very carefully. I had to watch and notice, like when someone was lining up inside the hash, where they were going to take me. I had to look at the lineman and see if they were leaning forward. That probably meant it was going to be a run. Or if they're leaning back, it's probably going to be a pass. Was my receiver licking his fingers? Every time he licks his fingers on film, the ball's coming to him, whatever the case may be. So this pattern recognition was how I was able to overcome this shortcoming. There was the athlete that I wanted to be, and there was the athlete that I was. So the patterns of what I've recognized is there's going to be pain and difficulty in these transitions. Going from junior high to high school was a massive. Going from high school to college was a different leap. And in these transitions, what I found and what I've seen consistently is two things happen to people in transitions. They either let it transform them or they transfer. And what I mean by that is when the difficulties come and the pain happens, the question you say, what do I do with this pain? What do I do with this difficulty? You either let it transform you into something beautiful, life-giving, and wonderful, or you transfer. You transfer that onto other people. You start blaming the circumstances. It calcifies into bitterness and frustration and broken relationships. And so the things that I've learned, in those transitions, even when I was transitioning and playing college football, I wasn't ready to be done yet, but it was done with me. And so those transitions I've learned through life, and it's something I've taught my kids, and it's something that I coach my CEOs on. There's going to be transitions and there's going to be difficulties. Let them transform you, and don't let it become something you start transferring that disappointment, that frustration, whatever, onto others.
Yeah. So how does someone go about doing that? Well, sort of allowing it or working with it to transform them, versus transferring. What's in that?
I think it's, and you and I've heard this out throughout our lives. I think, you look at the 5 closest people around you, and that's going to tell you kind of who you are. So how you let it transform you is look at the people around you. Are they people that they transform? Or are they people that transfer, that are always kind of blaming things? It's, I didn't get a break here. This is, this person's against me, or whatever the case may be. So it starts with the people that you put close around yourself, and then it comes from within. The CEOs and executives that I work with that perform at a high level, it's not because I've coached them to perform at a high level. It's because that's what they expect of themselves. And they set goals. They think big. They start small and they move fast. But it's not even a thought process. It's almost like a foregone conclusion. I am going to let this shape me into something better. And because of who they surround themselves by and the way that they hold themselves to a higher standard, they transform. The ones that I have worked with and the people that I've known that transfer, they just can't hear it. They can't hear that they're in that victim mentality, and they don't have to stay there. It's a choice. You can get out of that. And so I don't know if that answers the question or not.
No, I think that's brilliant. I mean, if I'm recapping what I'm hearing on just this part, it's like it kind of starts with the mindset that you want to transform, that the change is happening and you want to rise to that occasion, right? And then the second part you're talking about is looking around and finding people that are in that process and can be in that process with you, and then maybe that you admire and might even be doing it better than you, or at least be willing to do it with you and carry you there versus hold you back, right? And the third thing you talked about is maybe being clear about your intention, right? Setting some objectives around that, your standard around that, and not letting that drop. The other thing that comes to mind for me too is sort of a lot of like just really trying to be clear on living consistent with your values through those things. Cause the thing I've noticed especially in business, but in life is like, as things change and transform, as things get potentially ugly, like a CEO is going to get fired and now a leadership vacuum is created. And, with those vacuums, people want to fill them and they fill them with all sorts of weird energy, right? I mean, it's crazy.
Oh yeah.
It's crazy. It's just watch the show, right?
I got a text this morning about this very thing.
Right. It's like, well, let's just see what happens here.
Yep.
And then you've just got to remind yourself, I'm going to stay consistent with my values. I'm going to operate the way I always operate. And I'm not going to change because those conditions have changed, or let that situation change, how I operate. But it's hard because it's hard not to get pulled into that. But it sounds like, like that could be an example. I mean, do you have a set of sort of like, for you personally, no matter the situation, what kind of values do you kind of try to uphold? And
so my faith is really big to me. We talk about these transitions, when I was transitioning out of playing college football, I realized that my identity was wrapped up in the cheers I got to hear every Saturday. And I would have said I alone can do it, but I can't do it alone, but I wouldn't have believed the second half. I would have said I can do it. I got this. And I learned that my identity had to be wrapped in other things, and it couldn't be in what was sitting in my bank account. It couldn't be in the things that I had that I could show off or any of those kind of things, although it was tempting. And I've always had a faith, but my faith really grew during that transition time where the values that I have, what's on the shirt that I'm for you. I believe that people, I think there's three kinds of leaders. I think there's leaders that are for you. They care more about what they can put in than what they can take out. They have more of a plentiful mentality than a scarcity mentality. They operate from a place of humility, but not paralyzing uncertainty. They're bold, but not harsh. They speak the truth, but they bathe it in love, and I've given talks about this all around the world. And I ask people, if there's for you, there's against you, which is fairly rare, but there's those people out there for whatever reason. Maybe you remind them of somebody that beat them up on the playground or something. I don't know, but they're just against you for some weird reason. And then there's leaders that are for themselves. They've been through enough leadership training, read the books and done all these things. And they know how to behave, but under pressure, their true agenda comes out. They care more about what they can get out of you than what they can put into you. They have somewhat of a scarcity mentality. I've learned a lot from kind of for themselves leaders. It's not that they're bad or terrible people. Some are really great people. That's just fundamentally at the end of the day, that's what they're for. And I've asked people like, which one, what percentage do you think are this? And consistently people say there's about 10% of people that are for you. But those are the people that if right now, if your phone went off and it was somebody that was one of those people in your life, we'd stop this podcast and you would go, if they needed you, you would drop what you're doing.
Yeah.
If it was someone else, you just hit and say, I'll get this to them later. Those kind of people that make those kind of differences in your life. And so those values that I learned through my faith and growing and watching other people that I admire, there's a lot of people that have been hurt by faith. I get that and I understand it, but I was too to some degree, but I kind of put that aside and looked at the values and the ways in which I wanted to conduct my life, how I wanted to be treated, how I wanted to treat other people. And so those are kind of, I can give you the adjectives of what the values are, but I think you generally get it's at the core is truly being for other people. It's why I do what I do today, because I didn't have that person. It's I've had those coaches that poured into me. You said defining moments. You want me to share one real quick?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So playing college football, we're playing Air Force. And all week ahead of that, they're getting us all worked up how dirty Air Force is and how they hit late and don't take that. And they're running on film. We had a meeting where we had the coaches leave and, the leaders on the team were saying, we're not going to take this week. And so we get into the game and, there's a play, there's a pile, the tackles, everyone's kind of by the pile. I'm kind of standing by the pile. And someone from Air Force comes, and you can see it on the film, comes running across and throws an elbow and hits me in my face. But my head goes back. And then I come back, and there's a guy. It wasn't the guy that did it to. It was a guy standing by the pile. So, if like somebody was like kneeled behind you and pushed you over. So my first thought is like, he's by that pile. I'm going to go light him up, and he's going to go flying over that pile. Well, you got to imagine now people are getting off. I mean, it's late. so I just lost my mind. I had all this going through the week, and I went and just lit this guy up. And so the ref doesn't throw the flag in the air. He throws it at me and hits me in the back. I had a welt in my back. Coach throws his headset, breaks it, just shatters. The whole stadium starts chanting my number. So now we've got 50,000 people chanting my number. I wanted to crawl up and die. It's not who I am as a person, but it is who I was in that moment. And my dad didn't wait for me after the game. No one wanted to sit next to me on the way home. And this is the defining moment. The defensive coordinator says, Kirk, meet me in my office tomorrow. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm done. But I just felt awful. And I found the guy after the game that I did that to. And I said, I'm so sorry. And he was gracious and totally appropriate. He's in the Air Force. He probably could have twisted my neck off. But anyways, coach brings me in and he goes, Kirk, I know who you are as a person. I know you're dying 1,000 deaths right now. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, here's the deal. Anybody that's never made a mistake is allowed to hold this against you. Otherwise, we're good. And I was like, wow, like the gift of grace and mercy in a moment when I didn't deserve it, game changer for me.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing. That's a great story. And I'm sure you've paid that forward, that same grace.
Tried to.
Time. Yeah. That's amazing. Well, let's talk more about the sport in particular. We talked about what got you into coaching and into executive coaching and what you do professionally in helping teams and individuals. What got you into football initially? Because you're obviously a great athlete. You're in great shape
obviously.
now. Obviously. I mean, it's not good enough to do a lot of things.
Yeah,
okay, at least. You. Okay, so I'll go with you on that. But why football? How did you choose football?
Growing up, I don't know. I just had a love for it. My dad played football. He was an All-American, in college. And I think sometimes you just want to win the affections of your parents. So you kind of do some of those things. But I don't have really a type, but it just from a little age, like every Christmas, that's what I would get is like, out of the Sears catalog or whatever, like the Broncos, because we lived in Colorado, the Broncos outfit. And I would just go outside and just play. I mean, if I just had a ball in my hand all the time. I mean, I was a 3-sport athlete. It's just something that just, like I said, it was my identity for most of my youth. And so that's really what got me into it.
So what kept you going back?
I think I got a lot of recognition and praise for it. I think that, I didn't have a lot of guidance coming out of, really in my younger life. And so I was getting recruited to play football out of high school. And I also wanted to run track and really enjoyed track, but all the schools didn't want me to run track. They just wanted me to play football. So I didn't accept any offers. And all of a sudden it got to the end of the year and I was like, well, now I don't have anywhere to go. So I had a small school in Nebraska that said, you can come here and run track and play football. And I was like, all right. So I went there for a year and I was like, and I really excelled and did well. And so then I said, all right, I'm going to go to some of these schools that were recruiting me. And I called them and they said, you're allowed to come, but you're going to have to walk on. And we think you'll earn a scholarship, but that'll be up to you. And so that's what I do is I went and walked on. And so I've always been something, if something was hard, you told me I couldn't do it. And a lot of people are wired up like that, that's what I go do. So I walked on and I got a full ride scholarship. Otherwise I wasn't going to be able to go to school.
Yeah.
I had 1 year. And if I didn't get that scholarship, I was going to have to go get a construction job or do something like that. It just wasn't going to happen. So in a lot of ways, it was the sport that I loved, but it's also, you kind of use these words, it kind of picked me because it was kind of the thing that allowed me to stay in school, allowed me to get into the career that I'm in, allowed me to do the things that I'm able to do. And so,
yeah, I'm also curious about the different environments of different sports, and football definitely is a unique environment. How would you describe the feeling of being on the track team, showing up to track practice and meets versus football? What's the difference between those two? Because I never really ran track in any serious way.
Yeah, you're much more playing on a team. You understand that you can't do it alone, and it's not so much of an individual sport. Plus, in football, unlike in business, it's a zero-sum game. If I'm a cornerback and you're a receiver, one of us is winning and one of us is losing. That is not the way life works, or should not work, although some people approach life that way, or business. And you're rewarded in football for deep aggression, almost, angry kind of, like aggression. Whereas in, playing another sport like track or something like that, it's more about the skill and the art. And it's, I could be a good corner by studying film. I couldn't get faster by studying film. Like either I was fast or I wasn't, or I could jump far or I couldn't. And so you either had it or you didn't. Whereas like in these team sports, you can cover up for some of your sins or things that you're not good at by relying on other teammates. And, there's a bigger game going on. Yeah. More of a mental game going on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. It's definitely, as you're describing it, like well, first thing I would say about, there's really no bigger stage than football as a event. I mean, think of the Super Bowl. I mean, you could argue something the World Cup or soccer, but let's just call it what it is, or high school football or college football. I mean, that's a stage you're walking onto that has a lot of energy, a lot of bright lights.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. Wait a minute. Keep going.
Well, no. So a point is, and I feel like track, unless you're at like the Texas Relays or a special event, I mean, it's a totally different feel walking out. I mean, it could be equally as competitive and energizing, but in a different way. And then you talk about that complexity of working within and around other people, and especially the role that you had to play in that. I could see how that's different than just showing up to run your own race and maybe be a little more absolute that way. So I could see how that could probably call to you in that way. But what were you going to say about the stage of football?
Well, I was going to say, one of my favorite memories about playing, we played LSU, and they have it was at night, and they have an incredible stadium, and it goes like straight up, so it feels like the fans are right on you. We get off the bus, they have lines of people going, tiger bait, tiger bait. They have a lion with a microphone in the cage. It roars, it goes throughout the thing and stuff like that. And that's just like, you don't get that running a 100-yard dash.
Yeah.
Unless you're Noah Lyles or something like that. And like, who. But
it's hard to replace that.
Yeah.
Well, and it's, we can come back to more of this, but like, if I think of the companies you work with companies who are on the biggest stage, right? In the most pressure sort of environments, right? They've raised a lot of money. They're going after a big vision, and they have to execute. They're not like hiding under the covers and growing a business. Most of them, right? I'm sure there are some that are more quiet than others, but so that probably speaks to you as well. Well, if we come back to now, let's talk about the position. So obviously you had speed and you could run. So there's a lot of places you could do that on a football field. How did you end up at cornerback?
Once again, I end up kind of just falling into stuff like how I got into my career. But my freshman year, my dad didn't let me play football until I was in 8th grade. He was worried about and like I said, he played at a high level. He just felt like my bones weren't mature enough and all this other stuff, and the hitting and stuff like that just wasn't necessary. And I was just jonesing to get out there and like play so bad. So by the time I got out there to play, your first year, I don't care how good you are, it's just going to be awkward. It takes you at least a year to catch up. That's why I always tell people that kids are playing. I'm like, if they were just playing for the first year, like it takes that. So I was big enough that where I played, like if you weighed a certain amount, you couldn't be in the backfield or receiver. You had to be on the line, defensive or offensive or tight end. And so I weighed enough that I had to be on the line. So I was a defensive lineman, and I was a tight end. And so, but I got to high school, and kids are starting to grow by then, and weight didn't matter. And so I went to the first practice and said, well, where do you want to play? I was like, I don't know, defensive lineman. That's my dad was a lineman in college. And I was like, all right, I'll take it. And they're like, no, why don't you go over with the defensive backs over there? And so I went over there, and I started off playing strong safety. And just because I had some decent speed at the time, they said, hey, we're going to move you out to corner. And I was like, all right, so just kind of, it found me more than I found it.
Yeah. Well, and what are the characteristics of either a great safety or let's say cornerback or defensive back in general? Like, what would you say? Like, there's probably a textbook, like this is what makes a great like defensive back.
Mm-hmm.
And then how did you uniquely play it that was like the way what Kurt brought to it? I'm curious.
Okay. So yeah, just characteristically, what makes somebody a great defensive back, one is just the mental toughness. It's a really hard position. You've got to be quick. You've got to anticipate. You can't wait. In business, I say there's two kinds of cultures. There's ones that have see and solve, meaning they see the problem, they solve it. People show up and they creatively, they work long, they get rewarded for, long hours and showing up with a whiteboard. And then there's cultures that are predict and prepare, meaning they predict the problems and prepare for them before they show up in the results. And those are two different behaviors. The top cornerbacks and safeties, they predict and prepare. They study the film. They understand that you're going to get beat from time to time, but you can't let it beat you all the time. And that's unfortunately the mental part of that game is really, really tough. So the top corners obviously or safeties have really athletic ability. The really gifted ones, they have a certain, they're above 6'2", 6'3". So there's some physical things. There's some mental things. But above all else, they care about being great at their sport, and they care about being a great teammate. I mean, the really, really good ones.
But why do they particularly care more about that, or a lot about that versus other positions?
I don't know that it's more than other positions. I just said these are the characteristics.
Yeah. How about you? So what did you sort of like, what you brought to that position that separated you and the way you played it?
Like I said, I kind of knew that I didn't have the physical, things that were needed, and I had decent enough speed. But I mean, we were playing Tennessee, LSU, Miami when they were good. I mean, we were playing, top schools. And I knew I couldn't give them a 30-yard cushion every single time. That wasn't going to work, especially when they called bump and run. So I was just super paranoid, and I'd studied film. And I mean, I would literally I would say 8 out of 10 plays, I could tell you what was going to happen because the tendencies were so significant, on where the linemen were how the quarterback came up to the line, where they lined up on the field. Like it was, because you practice. We were there 40 hours a week practicing without the games. So these people come out and they practice it. They're going to do the same thing. And if you watch film enough, you're going to pick up on those little things. Yeah. That was my only hope. It really was, because I had to be able to cut them off before they made their, cut. I had to be able to tell that they were just dipping and they were going to, dart out. Because if I jumped on their dip, they were out and I was done. So I had to rely on being a student of the game. I so badly wanted to be athletic enough that I didn't have to, but it just.
Well, it seems like the common thread too, because I've known you long enough now, is this humility actually and the way you approach everything. And I think you even approach sport in that way, right? You're trying to really understand where you're strong, maybe where you're weaker, or where you're fully capable, and what your advantages are and where your disadvantages are. And not everybody, necessarily approaches things that way. They sort of just believe they can be whatever version they decide to be. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's something you feel like you've carried through, but I think I definitely see that in you a lot, like this ability to just sort of be as humble as possible in every situation.
Well, I'm the most humble person I know.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. No, of course. Yeah.
No, I'm teasing.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. Your words, they carry weight with me. They really do. I appreciate that. I think that, that the things that have been most meaningful in my career are the people that were willing to humble themselves, and I've learned from. And so, as the saying goes, I'm standing on the shoulders of people, and I'm standing on scars from not doing it right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, look, you and I talked a little bit about this, but I had not shared this with you in years, but I had this moment, because this whole concept or idea or theory around the sport that we chose or that chose us, and the position that we chose or that chose us, how that can influence, be like a key or roadmap to what we do down the road if we are in transition and trying to figure that out. And sometimes we do need to think about that because those transitions are harder, and maybe sometimes we fall into the next thing and it becomes more obvious. But for you, I had this moment when we were at Civitas where I'd already worked with you some at Bizarre Voice, obviously, and knew what you did for teams and individuals. So I had full faith in all of that. But there was this one offsite meeting. And as those offsite meetings go, I often refer to them as like chasing a black cat in a dark room. It's like you're going to just be fumbling around, bumping into walls, stubbing your toe, banging your shin. You're not going to know like why you're there until you know why you're there, right? Until that you catch that cat and,
Mhm.
and everything emerges. But we're in that moment of darkness, right? We're probably 3 hours into this offsite.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, when is Kirk going to do something?
I'm over there eating a Snickers.
Yeah, you had coffee and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and the granola bars that
yeah,
are
yeah,
in the
yeah.
snack bar. But when it's and then all of a sudden you just made one adjustment or one nudge in the meeting, right? You had a comment that kind of pulled the conversation back, and all of a sudden we're off on track and we're on point and we're solving the problem. I thought, gosh, this is a cornerback in action. If you intervene too early, it's a flag. If you intervene too late, it's a touchdown.
Mhm.
And everything in between is observing what you're seeing and reacting and responding to what you're observing and only taking action when it's going to be the right moment to take action. And I thought, wow, he is playing cornerback or defensive back in real life.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Does that resonate with you or?
Yeah, that's really that I haven't really thought of it that way. I mean, that's why you're doing this podcast. And that's why that's really thoughtful. I mean, sometimes you just kind of are who you are. You don't really step back from yourself and
Right.
think about that. So I really appreciate you kind of acknowledging that or pointing that out. Yeah, I think that's something that I learned, and is a learned behavior that I've carried into business without even consciously really understanding that um, you can't fix everything. You've got to know, like I said, when is the right time to insert yourself. If you're there too early, it's a flag. If you're there too late, it's a touchdown. And so, I think that ability to, for instance, like a coach in baseball, a really good hitting coach, they may watch somebody that's, they're hitting 300 and all of a sudden they're dropped down into the 200s. Well, if they've watched them enough, they may say, it's because you're dropping your elbow. They don't sit there and like, it's like the reason I don't take golf lessons is because they give me 85 things to do. And then I get out and I get 85 times worse. I need the person that's going to say, here's the one thing that's going to make the big thing happen. And so I just learned that at an early age, really, to kind of watch and observe. The thing in college is I was kind of like, what is it, Kenny Rogers song, The Gambler? I've made a lifetime of watching people's faces and knowing them what the cards are by the way they held their eyes.
Yeah.
Just studying and knowing when is the right time to flip the card, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is something that served me well as a cornerback. I think I started building that at a young age. Like I said, I didn't have the most fantastic environment growing up, and so I had to learn to watch and read people pretty carefully, or I was going to get hurt pretty significantly. So
Yeah. She had already tapped into building that skill set. Well, look, you started this conversation with you talking about the first thing that you do is observe and watch the film, right? And pick up the tendencies and be able to replay back what you're seeing, which then leads to your ability to predict and prepare for what's likely to happen or what the scenarios is happening. And you've talked about that even as in your early days, right? In playing. And then the magic of what you just described, how you take what you see now, which is 85 things, but only react or respond to one thing. Cause that's the other danger, right? Is like now you see everything and you feel compelled to just do everything, right?
Well, and I think as a coach or as a consultant or even a mentor, sometimes we feel like that's how we add value is quantity. And it's and candidly, you get rewarded for quantity. Like, what have you done for me lately? Type of thing.
Yeah.
But you can unintentionally create a lot of noise and confusion, and you've got to have that. You got to. Once again, it's like said, talk about, you got to be mentally tough and know that like, if you understand you're there to serve a bigger purpose and a bigger cause and to help the people that are there and put yourself aside, you can, take some of the bullets that allow you to, at the time, kind of unload the cannon, if you will.
Yeah.
So,
okay. So that's what obviously you've carried forward that make you exceptional in what you do. And that's what was learned over time, whether it started really early and through that experience. What did you have to unlearn, let's say, out of that whole football experience to take forward into your professional, maybe personal life after football that was sort of institutionalized in you or ingrained in you early on? Like what did you have to leave behind, let's say?
So, I'll tell you what I had to the biggest thing I had to unlearn, and I'll tell you a business situation where it really hit home for me is, like I said, in sports and particularly in football and particularly in a specialty position, it's a zero-sum game. At least, and we see these athletes like Baker Mayfield and some of these other people that just kind of treat everything, like not everything like, but I'm saying like they that's how they get themselves motivated. And people just like, maybe even that's what Noah Lyles was doing. Like when he's, he's just like, I don't know, because I don't know these people personally, but I'm saying, but you're taught it's a zero sum game. There's a winner and there's a loser. And so you learn to kind of architect your thinking, your behaviors, your approach to life, your, in that way. Well, that's not life. At least that's not a happy life. And that's sure not how you're going to win in business. Although there's people out there that believe that they're winning with that, but they're fooling themselves because they may be winning temporarily, but they're not winning the bigger game. So that's one of the things I had to unlearn. And also the aggressiveness. Aggressiveness served me well, but it didn't serve me well when I was trying to parent 3 daughters. And they will tell you that there was times that I didn't get that right. But we had that company that I came into. We quickly grew it. We were doing $1 billion in revenue. We sold that company. Good story, good outcome, but a lot harder than I thought it should be. And that CEO I told you earlier said, you've got a unique ability to look in a heart of company. You should go help people. The part I didn't tell you is he said, I want to invest in you. And I said, you want to invest in me? Like being on boards or being a consultant or something like that? I said, there's not going to be any return in that. Eddie, I remember he kind of sat back and he kind of wrinkled his forehead and he goes, I don't want a return. I just want to invest in you. And I remember thinking, I've got a lot to learn about leadership. My first thought was, why would you do something if you couldn't get it back? Zero sum. He taught me that's not the game that we're playing here. That's not the game that you're going to win at. And that stuck to me. That's where a big part of the 4U came from.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so telling. Especially, the first part that you described around the competitiveness of that zero sum kind of mentality. It definitely can ring true. Like even think about it in sport. Like sometimes imposing your will to win happens before the game even starts, right?
Yeah.
It's the gamesmanship in the beginning. It's I'm going to take away your will to compete.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts, right?
Yeah,
and it may even start in warm up, but the way the warm up's going, or in the tunnel, or for sure on the first or second play. Right? I want to take out your will to compete. And what you see is actually, no, we need to be in this game together. And I need you to want to, we need to want to work together. And even, it could even be competitively, there could be some partnership opportunities for companies, things like that and there could be a time and place where you want to take companies' will away to compete. Like do not come into this space because we own it, But again, there could be a time and place for that, but
Absolutely.
It's rare.
There's always a time, like anything to an extreme, like being not competitive at all. That's not good. But
right.
Zero sum is so it's learning to know when to insert and have the wisdom and the experiences, and once again, the people around you to help kind of know. As a CEO, it is no joke. There's so much written about it and so much content. It's no joke, a hard stinking job.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, there's many more trials than there are trophies. I can tell you there are. The trophies are nice. They're real nice, but the trials are real.
Yeah.
And they're tough. And so, being able to know, like I said, knowing when to be competitive, how to have that, but not take it too far. Where now we're starting to creating a zero sum game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes in life you have to do that. That's okay. I mean, playing sports, it helps you. But, and when you're competing with somebody, sometimes figuring out how to go around the left side and quit going around the right side actually creates a bigger win opportunity.
Yeah. 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 There's so much to unpack there about just, it could be, again, like you said, with family, with your partner or spouse or significant other. It could be in the business. Like you've got to find a way to get people to work together, even if you might be competing in some way. The only way it's really going to work is if you can figure out how to make it all work. So I think that's super fascinating. Well, talk to me a little bit about so you're obviously a mentor to CEOs at the highest level and to key executive teams, but I'm sure along the way, that one CEO's son who's graduating, who's coming out of football, wants to talk to you and get some advice. Or so as you play that role now for, let's say, a son or a daughter in transition, whether it's just from a job to job, or in this case, maybe elite level sport into that next thing like you did, what advice do you find yourself telling them the most and sharing with them?
That's a really good question. I've been super fortunate to be in that role, and I've been super fortunate to have the trust and the respect of 3 son-in-laws now that care about what I think.
It's amazing. Yeah.
I say that sincerely. I'm
Yeah.
lucky. I really am. And what I share with them, because a lot of times, they're in pursuit of, they want to dream big and think big and have the ability to go big. And I'm not just talking about my son-in-laws, I'm talking about these other people that I've had a chance to work with and be with. And a big part is, they'll read these books and listen to these podcasts, and it's all trying to consume this information. What are the patterns? What do I need to do to be successful? And I'm like, what does success mean to you? Because if you want a big fat bank account, then there's our things you can do to kind of make that happen. Do you want a family that's thriving, that is healthy and connected? And you got to think about what does that look like? Because everything is going to you're going to have to sub-optimize some things in life and optimize others. And so what I encourage people to do is, be very clear on where you're going, because if you aim at nothing, you will hit your target every time. And I see a lot of people that misaligned their talents and their skills with where they want to go. Like I said, there was a kind of athlete I wanted to be, and there was the athlete I was. And having that radical acceptance of that reality was not easy. It wasn't a head concept. It was a heart concept. And it took time. And so a lot of advice I give them is saying, look, the people you're putting around yourselves, pattern match against where you're going, understanding that this is a journey, talking to them about this concept of transforming. Life will come and it will be hard. You've got to ask yourself, what do I do with this pain? Do I let it transform me, or do I let it transfer onto others and get the results of that? And so it's more about starting with the end. I think I can't remember who coined that, but starting with the end and looking backwards, because I've seen a lot of people that are tormented because they're working and doing something, and they are either aiming at something or they want something, but they've shaped their lives that they're never, ever going to get it. And they just don't do the reconciliation of that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think that's really great advice, because it would be easy to very quickly just assume you know the answer to that question, or maybe it's changed, right? Or maybe it will change in the future, but right now, you are where you are. But it'd be easy to just assume that you took 5 minutes over coffee to think about that, and that you've got clarity of that vision of what you're aiming at and where you're going. But it probably takes a lot more than that. Just like a company, okay, let's get together for 2 hours on Monday and do OKRs for this year. Yeah. Why would that take 2 days?
Yeah. I already know them.
We need to grow this year, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we got to do. No.
So maybe it's worth spending some real time on that. I think that's probably.
What's the journey?
Yeah.
It's the journey that's valuable.
Yeah.
That's the piece where you have these serendipitous conversations. That's where you have these moments. So I've seen literally where entire strategies have transformed in a matter of a half hour during a 2-day offsite. That half hour wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
It would have happened in 2 hours.
Yeah.
It took that. And so sometimes it's not sometimes, I'd say most times, you got to respect the journny.
Yeah.
Taking 2 days in itself isn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
But the journey, it will. One of my son-in-laws was telling me about, and all of them have the ability to be very, very successful. He's telling me about all the stuff he was doing and chasing, and it was really exciting. And I was like, well, how does that match up to kind of where you want to go? And there was just this pause of like, I said, those people that did that, if you run the plays they're running, I guarantee you will get the same success they're getting. But is that the success that you wanted or want? And so that's true in when you're designing a business, when you're heading where you're going and stuff like that. Like I say, a lot of companies are just wandering generalities. I've literally spent the last 20 years, I probably worked with over 15,000 different CEOs and their teams. The game film I have is I've been very fortunate. Consistently, two of the things that I hear is they're not super clear on what their goals are. When I listen to the business, and it tells me like not everybody's super clear on that. So if we're aiming at nothing, or at least something that's confusing, we will hit it. The other part of it is I hear our communications don't work. Well, my word, with Slack and with emails and with Zoom and with you tell me we don't. So what they're saying is we're not listening. The most effective leaders are good communicators. They can hear what's not being said. And so that's the piece that I think, the advice that I want to, going back to your question, the advice that I give and stuff like that is, be somebody that's leaning in, that's listening, that's willing to be in the journey, but be very clear where you're aimed at. And it's fine to change where you're aimed at. That's absolutely fine. Even for a business, it's like sacred. Like, no, we can't change it. We can't. Yes, you can. Sometimes you have to. Like, your thesis isn't what you thought it was. It got funded and when money was easy. But now that money's not easy, we're finding out your thesis is no good. So we need to pivot. That's okay. But you just got to be really clear where you're aiming.
Yeah. Yeah. As I've had similar conversations, obviously, with folks who've been transitioning, in particular out of sport or military or other, the coach in me, has similar kind of conversation, let's say, but also can get a little anxious watching someone fumble around a little, trying to find their way. And that little might be 3, 4, 5 years, right? And it might be several conversations, and you sort of like, it's almost that coaching you wants to get in there faster, right?
Yeah.
And shorten the cycle. And sometimes it takes what it's going to take to go on that journey, right? But I'm curious, how do you think about that? Like in that period, in that phase, how do you think about, like, how should we unpack? Like, does it need to be efficient? Does it need to be right? Does it need to be going forward? Like how do you settle into what needs to happen there? Does that make sense? Like,
oh, it's a great question. As you're asking the question, I'm thinking about you've got kids.
Yeah.
And that's probably the area that gets tested the most, right? Because we want them to make their own mistakes. We don't want them to make the ones that we know are going to hurt. And it's the same thing in coaching, right? I mean, the heart of a coach is, like I said, is wanting to see somebody get better than they were, better than they could be, being fully what that person's able to do. And so, I think that's one of the things that probably makes the coaching industry not work, is because people want to jump in and fix it because that feels like value, and it is in the short term, but it really robs people in the long term. And I think it's a really good question that I don't have a really good answer for on how to do that. For me, it's just been years and years of experience. Like I said, I've worked probably over 15, like I didn't have that when I was started, over time I've learned to kind of let things, and it's some of the best compliments the CEOs and executives I've worked with said, you have this unique ability to let me go, but don't let me drive off a cliff. And you kind of let me learn and you kind of let me grow and stuff like that. And it's not even something I'm consciously kind of doing, honestly. It's, I think it's just kind of recognizing that, there's things where people are really going to hurt themselves and you gotta jump in. But for the most part, you've got to just kind of guide them and let them learn, because that's where the real growth is going to happen.
Yeah.
Growth is gradual. It just is.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's quick and fun and nice, but for the most part, in general in life, growth is gradual.
Yeah.
You got to let it, you've got to be patient with it.
Well, and maybe what we're saying is, like, maybe growth is the goal, and actually getting somewhere isn't the goal, because that is going to be, that's going to ensue, right?
Yep.
But the thing that you're pursuing is growth, and maybe there's something there. And the other thing that dawns on me in this conversation that's come up that I haven't thought about before, but we've touched on it several times, is the concept of time and what role time plays in this. So it's interesting to me because as I think about sport, there's 2 ways that I think about time. This is my own personal experience. One is you always have this clock of, like, I'm getting older, right? And I'm running out of time to get better because I got to be so good by a certain age to make this team, or to play in college, or to get to the next level, or my career is closing, so it's that time. And then you got the time of the game clock, right? And so it forces you to do things within the constraint of time, which can create urgency and be good. And as a company, you could set a goal, and you set that goal with some time horizon, and that can, by the book, be theoretically the right thing to do. But once you start to constrain things by time, you start to make decisions in a different way if you focus on progress, right? And that's the goal, actually, is progress and not time. So now, a number of times I've been in mentoring conversations where someone says, well, by this time I need to have this done, or, hey, and think about an athlete who's now spent maybe 10 years in the league, whose peers or people who went to college with are now 10 years into, like, their investment banking career. You can feel behind.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the worst situation, is to have time be your constraint. I don't know what your take is on that, but I think that can cause us in some ways to provide a sense of urgency, and that can be positive, but in other ways can cloud our judgment of like what we're really going after.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I think, like we said earlier, anything to an extreme becomes a negative. So no element of time is probably not good.
Right.
Too much of like where you're tied to it, and that is the driving force, is like by this time, and that's everything that's driving you, is probably not good. It's a component. It's a spoke in the wheel that you need to understand and kind of navigate towards. Time is it's interesting, and this has been said many, many times. We all have the same amount of time. We all have the 7 days, 24 hours, 168 hours a week, whatever. It's what we do with it, and that's where it comes back to what you're saying is what if the goal is growth, because growth is going to is truly the force multiplier.
Right.
If you're growing as an individual, not just growing the business, that leverages into everything.
Yeah.
There's nothing that does not leverage into. As the saying goes, change is going to happen. It's inevitable. We're changing here as we're even, having this conversation. But growth truly is a choice, and it truly is gradual. And so if the goal is growth, not singularly, but it is a key component of that, I think having an element of urgency and time kind of overlaid to it is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for some people it just becomes unhealthy because they become so obsessed with it. Relationships are falling apart and everything. It's like that. It's like, wait a minute. Well,
Yeah. Well, so maybe I'll have to ask you this question on this topic.
And time is oftentimes wrapped more in ego than it is the actual element of time.
What do you mean by
Like, why is this time? Like, it's like, well, I want to be this big by this time. I want to have this, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. By 30, I need to have done this. By 40, I need to be a millionaire by 45.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I'm going to be retired by this age.
Yep.
And then you put this just unnecessary, fine, write that down somewhere and put it away. But there's a lot that needs to happen.
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. That's fine. And you absolutely can make that happen.
Right.
I mean, if that was somebody's goal, I think I could show them how to make that happen. But then don't say, well, but I'm not going to my kid's soccer games, or I don't really know who my neighbor is, or a friend across the street is, having some kind of illness. I don't know what it is. Cause that's not what your goal is, which is fine. There's not one that's better than another. Just be clear. Cause something is, when you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else. So be clear on what you're saying no to, and just be okay with that. That's what I see. So many people get wrapped around the axle because they're misaligned. And it's like, what you're pursuing is not bad. It's just, you want all of this. And wouldn't that be great if we could all do that? And there are some people, those are the stories that you read about, you hear about, make the front, there's people that seemingly have it all, but that's just not real.
Yeah. So if we stick on this topic of growth, so we talked about, okay, if you're in this transition or period where you're finding the next thing, okay, define success, right? Define what you're going after next and be as clear as you can on that. Maybe you get clear on the people that you surround yourself with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who maybe people who are on transformation, people who have been through it, right? People can help you, people you admire, right? And then you talk about setting goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Around those things. And let's get to the growth part. Okay, so now you've done those things and those things are in motion. Now it's like, what do I go do every day? And we're like, look, you're going to go get better every day to put yourself in motion in service of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give, or what areas do you think that, let's just say somebody who's played 10 years in choose your sport or competed in 2 Olympics and now is trying to come out and go figure out how to professionally go achieve what they want. What kind of skills do you think that they probably, it's going to be individual to some degree, but what are the most important skills that you've seen that people probably need to develop that maybe haven't been developed, or that they need to really be able to lean on?
Yeah. So good question. Skills, to me, the advice I would give is the skills are secondary. It's the mindset that's primary. It's the same mindset that you probably had to perform in athletics, whatever level. And athletics are such a beautiful place to learn about life. I mean, we haven't spent much time talking about it, but you know that.
Yeah.
But it's just, these life lessons are just so rich. But it's that mindset of having that ability to have clear vision for what you're trying to accomplish, to having that commitment to, and that conviction, not just commitment, but conviction to driving towards those outcomes, understanding that it is a journey and not a destination. These all sound like bumper stickers. I get it, but it's a mindset. It's a mentality, because like I said, when I go into an organization, I have individual confidential conversations with the individuals. I've told you I've worked with 15,000. I've gotten a chance to talk to 15,000 different individuals, at least, probably more. One of the questions I ask them is, tell me a little bit about your background. Start just after high school and just tell me a little bit about educational experiences you've had, jobs, responsibilities. I would say 99% of the time, where they are at and the success they're having was totally serendipitous. But they had this mentality that where they wanted to go. They had this transform versus transfer mentality. They didn't term it that way, but they had that. They had this grit and this determination about them. They had this humility, like I said, without being paralyzed by it. But they went to work in something, and then all of a sudden they're like, they didn't like it, but their friend's dad had a company, and they ended up over there, and they got fired from that job, and so they took a break and drove from, Kentucky to California, got stuck in Colorado, and went to work for this place. All of a sudden now they're the CEO of this Fortune 500 company. And I'm telling you, that's not a unique story. It's consistent. So it's not the skills. The skills will come that you need. It's the mindset that's gonna be the foundation.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, in some ways, as you're describing that, it provokes a little anxiety of like, especially the athlete in all of us, like has spent a lifetime being trained and working on like architecting our path, like I'm going to play on this team. I'm going to make this. I need to do these things. I'm going to go to practice. And all of a sudden you're like, well, you might be in a car driving to a thing and that might land you in a CEO role. You're like, whoa. That wasn't part of the game plan of how we're going to get there. So to your point, it's like, how do you develop the mindset? It's funny. I was just at home visiting family and some friends in Canada where I'm from. And we're talking about one individual in particular who's had a lot of success in their life and they've been super successful. And it just dawned on me that person has just been in the game. Like they put themselves out there in the game.
Yep.
And I think maybe that's the lesson in that is like, you're on that road trip for a reason because you're out in the game, you're experiencing things, you're bumping into traffic. I once said to a sales team, I don't know that I'm overly proud of it today, but this was several years ago, but we're in a corner conference room facing I-35 in Austin, and we were talking about finding leads, but none of us were doing any outbound kind of cold calling or outbound activities, references, things like that. I said, look over there, you see I-35? If you want to get hit by a car, walk into traffic. Like it's that simple, which is life. That the analogy is, if you want to find opportunity, which are these cars flying all around us, walk into traffic and that opportunity will find you. And so maybe in some ways I've thought a lot about that is like, what highway are you walking into? And maybe that's important too. Like finding the right, now we get back to like, does something look and feel like football? Mm-hmm. Does it have a big enough stage? Yep. And now we can say, okay, I want to get hit by a car, which is going to be an opportunity. Yep. In that case, it was a lead. It wasn't a car, so I could die. Be clear on that for HR. But the point is,
your whole team just got run over by cars.
You told them to walk into traffic. No, I said we want to find a lead. Anyway. So, but maybe that's worth something too. Is it's like, again, thinking about, well, what's the environment or the kind of situations that I thrive in, that I love, that gives me energy. What are the kinds of situations that don't give us energy? I had this example of somebody here who I was talking to that I'd met one morning, and I just was noticing the way she was training, like super serious, like hardcore and like super athletic and the things that she was doing in the gym. And I said, hey, what sport did you play? Like, clearly you're an athlete. It's like, oh, I wasn't an athlete. And I said, no, come on. I said, like, I see the way you're training. Like, you're an athlete. And she's like, well, I was a dancer. I was like, you were an athlete. Okay. I was like, what do you do now? And she was extremely proud of having made a transition out of being an esthetician into working logistics for a large company here in Austin. And she goes, yeah, I come into the gym every day, and for 90 minutes, I get in the pain cave and I put my head down and I crank, and then I turn it all off and I like walk into work. And I said, what? And she used the phrase pain cave, right? So now we're talking like training hard, pain cave, like there's a person who knows, how to put the work in, right? Yep. And I said, well, why do you do that? She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you don't have to do that. Like, you could be a dancer all day long. Yeah. And she's like, what do you mean? I said, well, all you have to do is find the conditions that bring that out in you. Now, the gym brings that out in you. Yeah. It gives you a chance to be physical in that way. Is there a job where you could be bringing those elements in that environment? But clearly you're working in logistics
in procurement logistics for like one of the largest companies in Austin, like it's not going to feel like dancing.
Yeah.
It might feel like something else, and maybe someone else is wired for that. So now look, that person may or may not be on the right path, and that may need to lead to the next thing. But I think maybe that's worth picking up. Like, it's kind of interesting as I've just think of the career you've had, like you're always on the big stage, you're being that teammate and you're playing the role that you can uniquely play that offers a few defining moments in a game, but they make all the difference, or over the course of a season, right? It isn't thousands over the course of a season. It's like those few that make the difference, right? Yeah.
Well, I love your story, and I hope people that are listening to this picked up on what you just said. Like, you saw something in somebody, you took time to hit pause, go have a conversation with that person. You caused them to think and to reflect, and you left them better than you found them. Like that's magic.
Yeah.
That's magic.
Yeah. We all need to do a lot more of
that. You do a lot of that. And there's a lot of people that do a lot of that. You and I are better because of people like that have done that for us. And, but yeah, to your point though, is it's being in the game. I didn't expect it after all these conversations, but it is uncanny. How many people are doing something that they did not get into. I remember when my daughter went to her freshman year of college, auditorium full of parents. I mean, I don't know how many parents are there. And the lady said, I want everybody to raise their hand in here that's doing what they went to college to do. By far, less than 10% of people in the room, less than 10% raise their hand. She goes, don't bug your kids about what their major is going to be, because they're probably not going to do what they're coming here to go to college. They're coming here for other reasons. And that's true. Like, and what she says, we're going to teach your kids how to be good critical thinkers, how to be in the game, is what she was saying.
Yeah. And be able to pay attention. Because it dawns on me too, that you have to be aware enough, like you said, to hit pause, be paying attention to see those opportunities as they arise. Right. Because sometimes we can have blinders on and opportunities will pass us by if we're not paying attention. Right?
Yep. Yeah. Well, like I said, if you're so focused on the wrong thing, that's why I said I see a lot of misalignment on what people, and opportunities are just kind of passing them by.
Yeah. Well, Kurt, man, this has been a just incredible conversation, as I knew it would be. If this is what it takes to get on your calendar, because I do know you're very intentional about your time. So the advice that you give to your clients, I know you uphold that same advice, which again, I've always respected and appreciated about you. You've got a family you're supporting and spending time with. You're taking care of your personal health. Your wife. You're in your community, right? You're in your church and all those things. So I think you're doing it right. And I know that it's not perfect for anyone, but I appreciate the way you put the pieces together.
Well, I value our friendship. And when you called and asked me to be on this, I was super excited, because I know whatever you're doing is going to be successful, and you're very thoughtful about how you ask questions. Your curiosity is like, it truly inspires me. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm looking forward to the next one. Thanks,
all right.
Kurt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please review and follow this podcast on all your favorite platforms. And if you want to continue the conversation one-on-one, feel free to reach out direct. You can find my information in the show notes. And we want to share your story. So if you're passionate about helping others through transitions to find their center and find their best path forward, feel free to reach out and let me know.